Ali Larijani was killed in a wave of strikes that, according to Israel, targeted Iranian military sites in Tehran, as well as Avaz, Shiraz and Isfahan. The shipping lanes in the Straits of Hormuz remain blocked by Iran, which is only allowing vessels from countries such as India and Pakistan to pass. And a tanker was hit to the east of Fujairah in the Gulf of Oman. Multiple drones also targeted the US embassy in Baghdad. For the second consecutive day, the UAE closed its airspace after a drone fire near Dubai airport. Missile explosions were reported in Abu Dhabi and Al Bahia. Multiple explosions were also reported in Qatar and Bahrain. Iran continued to fire missiles at Israel overnight, showing it retains the capacity to carry out long-range strikes. Israeli forces again targeted southern suburbs of Beirut, with explosions reported in Kafat, Harakreik and a residential building in Doha Aramoun. Israeli ground forces pushed further into southern Lebanon under instructions to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure. So here's how day 18 of this war unfolded. Wars can be just or unjust, but the path to judgment is always strewn with rubble and death. And this one is no different. In Tehran, we don't know what they really think about America's and Israel's destruction from the skies, but we do know it is removing leaders that were once deemed unassailable. On Friday, this was Ali Larijani, Iran's de facto leader, walking for the cameras at a Jerusalem Day march in Tehran. A show of defiance from a regime where every leader is now dead or walking dead.
This morning we eliminated Ali Larijani, the boss of the Revolutionary Guards, the gangsters who in practice run Iran. We're undermining this regime in the hope of giving the Iranian people an opportunity to remove it.
A scion of Iran's revolutionary royalty, here is Larijani with Vladimir Putin. Here with the EU's former foreign policy chief in happier times when he helped negotiate a nuclear deal. An adept diplomat who always nurtured his links to the hardline Revolutionary Guard, a real power behind the throne. Listen though to this. Cheers from balconies as ordinary Iranians learned the news. Larijani was one of the principal architects of the brutal repression that saw thousands of anti-government demonstrators massacred early this year. So too Gholamreza Soleimani, head of the Basij militia group, the regime's army of street-level enforcers, call them thugs. We're not currently allowed into Iran, but one Tehran resident sent us this reaction to his demise.
The best news of all is that the Basij commander was killed last night. He was the commander who played a central role in the massacre of Iranian protesters on January 8 and 9. This has led to a deeply grim and tense atmosphere in the country. Even the way Basij forces treated me recently on the street was terrible, and it was under his order. Right now, I have a very strange feeling. I'm happy.
18 days in, and Iran's leadership has been decimated by Israel and the US. The supreme leader was taken out on day one. This, the strike on his compound, along with members of his family, top advisors and military officials during the same wave. Over subsequent days, strikes targeted others in the supreme leader's office. The defense minister and much of the military top brass have also been killed, as well as Revolutionary Guard Corps leadership, police, and now, overnight, two of the most important figures in that January crackdown on protesters. As Israel hunts Iran's leadership, their American partners have one clear priority in this war: to reopen the Straits of Hormuz, that crucial shipping lane effectively choked off, with dire consequences for the world's economy. Today, another American warship was heading to the region. President Trump wants European navies to help ensure safe passage, but America's old allies, stung by his bullying and berating, are desperate not to be sucked in to a war they did not choose. They know that Iran's wounded regime, along with proxy forces, can still inflict damage, not just at sea. This an attack targeting the US embassy in Baghdad overnight. America and Israel are picking off Iran's leaders one after another, but the regime clings on for now, and so do its supporters, encouraged onto the streets tonight even as bombs continue to fall. Will they be able to rebuild the Islamic Republic on today's ruins, or will they cede to a different kind of country? Ultimately, that will be the measure of success of this unpredictable war of choice. Now, in August of 1814, British troops entered Washington, D.C. and burned down the White House. The Anglo-American relationship has not yet hit that low ebb, but President Trump's annoyance produces a daily eruption. So Keir Starmer was with President Zelensky of Ukraine in Downing Street when the American president again returned to the theme of how disappointed he was in him and in NATO's refusal to join his war against Iran. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
As Iran grabs the world's attention, Keir Starmer wanted today to throw the spotlight back on Ukraine.
There is obviously a conflict in Iran going on in the Middle East, but we can't lose focus on what's going on in Ukraine and the need for our support there.
President Zelensky said they would discuss sensitive topics like relations with America.
Where we are with Americans and with Russians, we have to discuss this sensitive topic.
But as they met, President Trump was blasting European leaders, and Keir Starmer in particular, for demanding American help for Ukraine and then not coming to America's aid in attacking Iran. President Trump, hosting Ireland's Prime Minister, was asked if he might rethink America's relationship with NATO, perhaps even withdraw.
Are you rethinking the United States' relationship with NATO possibly getting out?
Well, I'm disappointed in NATO that we spend trillions of dollars on NATO. Think of it, trillions over the years, many trillions of dollars. It's one of the reasons we have deficits and we help other countries. And when they don't help us, I mean, it's certainly something that we should think about. When you say rethink, I have nothing currently in mind, but I will say that I'm not exactly thrilled when we help them with Ukraine. Look, Ukraine would have been over in one day if we didn't help. I think NATO's making a very foolish mistake.
NATO's Secretary General was in London with President Zelensky and Keir Starmer, who the president then turned on yet again. At one point, the Taoiseach felt he had to chip in and defend Britain's Prime Minister and Europe's honour.
I'm disappointed with Keir. I like him. I think he's a nice man, but I'm disappointed. You see that man right there? You know who that is?
Churchill.
Winston Churchill. The late, great Winston Churchill. And I put it right there, Winston Churchill. And, you know, unfortunately, Keir is not Winston Churchill.
Mr. President, it pissed on me.
No, hold it. Right.
Just could I
Hold it. Hold it.
just make a number of points. First of all, I think, notwithstanding what has happened, the transatlantic relationship between Europe and the US is very, very important on a number of fronts. And I think we've had issues over the last year or two, but we settled them. Keir Starmer has done a lot to reset the Irish-British relationship. I just want to put that on the record. But I do believe that he's a very earnest, sound person who I think you have a capacity to get on with, and you've got on with him before.
That didn't stem attacks on Keir Starmer and the relationship with Britain.
It was the longest, the oldest, should be the best. Always was the best until Keir came along, and now, and I like him, he's a nice man. He says everything beautiful. He's a very nice man with a beautiful family. Everything's perfect, but he doesn't produce.
Back in Westminster, President Zelensky gave a speech to MPs and peers, but targeted at a Washington audience. America's enemy Iran and Ukraine's enemy Russia, he said, are made of the same stuff.
The regimes in Russia and Iran are brothers in hatred. And that is why they are brothers in weapons. And we want regimes built on hatred to never win in anything.
The Commons committee room looked like an arms fair as President Zelensky pitched Ukraine's advanced tech as the answer to America and the West's military challenges.
These solutions can be used in your matters as well, including in complex situations like the Strait of Hormuz today. Drones can solve problems that even a fleet sometimes cannot.
President Zelensky said he'd given the king an iPad that clocks real-time advances and reverses in Ukraine's conflict.
His Majesty said he would share it with the Prime Minister.
Back in the White House, there was no sign of President Trump being in listening mode. He was asked about the Irish President Catherine Connolly's claim that the Iran war is illegal.
Who said that?
The Irish president.
Look, he's lucky I exist.
Everyone in the whole world should be very thankful for him, the president said. Ireland's Prime Minister, like so many before him, looked on poker-faced.
Everybody in the whole world should be.
Well, Keir Starmer wasn't the only target for the president's ire in the Oval Office. Iran was a threat, Donald Trump insisted, after his top counter-terrorism official resigned in protest over the conflict, saying Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. In a post on social media, Joe Kent, who had previously been a darling of the MAGA right and led claims that the 2020 elections had been rigged, urged the president to reverse course. Well, our US editor Anushka Astana is in Washington. Anushka, you were in that gilded boxing ring known as the Oval Office. What was the reaction?
Well, look, a tirade like that leads your phone to light up. And I've had messages from officials back in London and from those here in Washington, D.C. And one of them, I think, summed up the mood. It was an emoji with steam blowing out of its nose. I think that is the furious emoji. They are very, very frustrated. It is not the first time they've heard this from Donald Trump. One person said to me it might be about the 8th time, but it is difficult for them and a bit awkward. Donald Trump came from that meeting to Congress behind me, where there was a lunch at which the new British ambassador Christian Turner was invited. He had to go in with a smile on his face after that attack. So how do they respond to it? Well, listen, when I talk to people about it, they say the mood has to be keep calm and carry on. They insist that other conversations right up to the top are really positive between Yvette Cooper, our Foreign Secretary, and her counterpart Marco Rubio, John Healey and Pete Hegseth. They point out that the new ambassador has met 3 cabinet secretaries this week and all the conversations have been positive. They also say behind the scenes they've been leading conversations on trying to get a deal on the Strait of Hormuz, or if not a deal, some sort of agreement from allies, and that the Americans have recognised that. They've even briefed the US media about it. But it doesn't take away the fact that the president himself is very, very angry right now. And in fact, one of his allies, Lindsey Graham, has put on social media a post suggesting that it's as angry as he's ever seen the president when it comes to European allies.
And Anushka, does the resignation of his counter-terrorism director point to a split in the MAGA movement?
Well, I think Joe Kent, as you were saying, was a darling of the MAGA movement, and it certainly is the case that some high-profile figures in that movement are not very happy with this war in Iran. So, yes, I think it is a big deal, particularly because this isn't some senior bureaucrat. This was a political appointment, one that Donald Trump himself said was a great thing, a former military member, and as you say, someone who had backed the president up. Let me just read you one line from his letter. I cannot, in good conscience, support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Now, I should say Joe Kent is a controversial figure with links to the far right, but that suggestion, no imminent threat, clearly difficult for President Trump, although, of course, he has denied it.
Anushka, thanks very much indeed. Well, earlier I spoke to Dana Stroll, who was the US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East during the Biden administration. I started by asking her about that extraordinary moment in the Oval Office today when Donald Trump once again criticized Keir Starmer's stance on the war in Iran.
Well, first of all, I think the history of the British-American alliance would prove how critical it is for the security interests of both peoples in both countries. The United Kingdom has been a really critical partner of the United States in multiple coalitions, including the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, the Defeat ISIS coalition, Afghanistan, you name it. And actually, with respect to the current U.S. war of choice in Iran, the United Kingdom has provided access to its bases for the United States to continue its operations.
I mean, the regime has clearly been able to use the Straits of Hormuz as a stranglehold on the entire world economy. Are there any military options, genuine, plausible military options, to open up the Straits?
First of all, the Iranian regime has said the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and so everyone is behaving as if it's closed. Most tankers aren't transiting, insurers aren't providing insurance to the shipping companies, but we can see that there have been one-off agreements with India, with Pakistan, and of course, Iranian ships are transiting the Strait of Hormuz. So are there military options? Sure, we could do a naval blockade of other ships. We could do naval escorts. We could try to continue to take out all of the conventional capabilities the Iranians are launching at tankers that seek to transit the Strait. Or the international community could work together to de-escalate and insist and draw a firm line that Iran should not get to single-handedly announce that the Strait of Hormuz is closed.
And do you think at the end of the day, there has to be some kind of dialogue between the US, the Israelis, and whoever is left in Iran?
There has to be some sort of dialogue. In modern history, fighting and war doesn't stop. Well, war doesn't stop when fighting ends. There has to be some sort of political process, some sort of diplomacy on the other side of military operations. The United States and Israel are fighting this together, so presumably both of them should have some sort of say in this, but the region should also have a say. All of the affected countries in Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East that didn't have a say in starting this war definitely have a stake in how it ends and the framework and understanding about what comes after.
And finally, if this war ends with some kind of more benign regime, government in Iran that is friendly towards its neighbors, that the Israelis can live with, despite all the destruction and the death and the fact that it is a war of choice ultimately, would it have been worth it?
If we end up with a regime, with a government that's not this revolutionary regime, who is responsive to the Iranian people, who reflects the popular will of the Iranian people, who is committed to peace with Israel, economic integration, and not threatening with force the rest of the region and the world, that would be a wonderful outcome. Based on what we're seeing in the current trajectory of the conflict, even if Iran's conventional capabilities are degraded, it's very unlikely that we're going to have a complete change in the nature of the regime to that kind of government, which could provide that kind of outcome.
Too much of a gamble, then?
At this point, I think it would be a wonderful outcome, and that's what we should want, both for the Iranian people, who for the most part don't support this regime in Tehran, and we should want it for the Middle East. But the current campaign, air power alone, without the tools, like non-military tools to affect that kind of outcome, are unlikely to deliver that full-scale, 180 change for the people of Iran or the Middle East.
Dana Stoll, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me now is Holly Dagress, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute on Iran and US policy. Holly, it's great to have you back on the program. Let's start with Ali Larijani, who was killed this morning by the Israelis. How significant was he, and what change will that do to the surviving regime?
Well, Matt, thank you for having me on the show. This was probably, or arguably, the most significant killing since Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on February 28th, when the war initially began. Larijani is from a powerful family of 5 brothers. And it's interesting because he had been sidelined for some time after the 2021 presidential election, when he had tried to run for office but was disqualified by the vetting body known as the Guardian Council. And so for a moment, this figure that had played a role as a nuclear negotiator and of course as Speaker of Parliament for many years was not operating. And then after the 12-day war, suddenly he made a comeback as Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council and as kind of an interlocutor with countries in the region and with Russia. And so with his killing, it was seen as one of the key figures that was left at this moment.
And how many more deaths in their leadership pyramid can the regime survive before it falls?
Well, the 12-day war really had the Islamic Republic recalibrate its vision as a country. It came to the realization that they need to think about 4 layers deep of the clerical establishment in the event that somebody would be decapitated, including the supreme leader, of course. And I think that while he has institutional knowledge, a history within the regime and special relationships inside and outside the country, the Islamic Republic is still very much operating, and we've seen that there. And I think it's important to note that 3 branches of government, the legislative branch, the presidency, and the judiciary, all have their leaders still in place at this moment. But nevertheless, I think this could obviously change in the days, if not weeks, to come.
And what specifically will you be looking out for as an expert to see whether there are genuine kind of fatal cracks in the structure of the regime?
Well, I think the key thing is defections. We haven't at least publicly seen defections of, more significantly, the security apparatus, things like the IRGC, the Basij, or People's Militia, or the army itself. That being said, we've reportedly heard that 4 Iranian diplomats since the January massacre that they've reportedly defected. So I think that time will tell, and I think that that will depend on 2 things. If these individuals are able to get their salary and they're able to feed their families, because not everyone is ideological within these groups, and I think that will really tell what the situation is like with the clerical establishment itself.
I know it's early days, but the Middle East is full of American intervention with very sorry consequences and results, and indeed Western intervention. I'm thinking of Libya, I'm thinking of Iraq, which delivered ISIS. Is Iran going to follow down that route, or could there genuinely be a better outcome for the country? What's your guess?
It's really too soon to say because this war is ongoing. I know that the Iranian people would like to transition to a democracy, and I also know that democracy doesn't come through the air via bombs. And so I think it really depends on the situation in the ground, and if these defections happen. If these defections are to happen, I could envision a scenario where the regime does officially fall and that move actually to a democracy happens. But of course, as you noted, that there's a lot of other scenarios that this can turn to, unfortunately, but it's just too soon to say.
It is indeed. Holly Degress, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington.